Hello buddies and scallywags. Today we're going to be using real data from Pokemon card values throughout the entirety of the Pokemon card history. I'm Obvious Scully, and today's obvious goal is to find out if there are actually cards that you should be collecting as an investment. As a buyer and seller of Pokemon cards with thousands of dollars of purchases and sales, and as someone with a graduate-level academic background in statistical analysis, I wanted to share my research. What cards are included in this research? Cards with a TCG player market value of $100 or more. No stadium item or energy cards, and no cards without a TCG player market value. This is actually a pretty important distinction because some very valuable cards do not have TCG player market values. That's because these cards just aren't sold enough on TCG player. While all of this is undeniably interesting, unless you have a time machine.
What's this? It's a souvenir.
Pokemon base set booster box.
Hardly recreational reading material, Mark.
Well, hey, Doc, what's the harm in bringing back a little info on the future? Maybe we could
sell a couple cards.
Mark, I didn't invent the time machine for financial gain.
Therefore, I think it's much more practical for us also to be looking at what the most valuable card has been from each set, what the rarity of that card is, and what type of card it is, to see what we should be collecting in modern day sets. There were over twice as many cards worth more than $100 than there were in the most valuable cards in each set. However, there were 3 times as many legendary and Eevee cards but less than twice as many starters. Shiny Pokemon also represented nearly 3 times more in the $100 or greater dataset. Mewtwo and Lugia lost 1/3 of the representation, Rayquaza lost over half, and Mew is almost absent in the most valuable dataset. The Johto Legendary Trio were one of the most represented in the over $100 dataset, but were barely represented or absent in the most valuable card per set data. Over half the legendary Pokemon that were represented by 4 cards each in the $100 dataset were completely absent from the data for most valuable card in each set. While some of the remaining legendaries from the $100 dataset were absent, 3 actually gained representation. The most represented starter Pokemon and Pokemon overall in both datasets was Charizard. To absolutely no one's surprise. In fact, Charizard was represented by the same amount of cards between the datasets. The Pikachu family was the next most represented in both datasets, losing 3 cards but gaining a pre-evolution. While Blastoise was the next most represented in both datasets, it only had 2 cards in the most valuable card by set data. The remaining starter representation decreased by 50%. While all evolutions were represented in the $100 or more dataset, almost half lost representation in the most valuable by set data. The cards represented by characters that were not legendary, starter, or Eevee dropped from 81 to 28 between datasets. The most represented Pokemon from this group in the $100 dataset dropped by 7 cards, while Arcanine was completely absent. While Gengar was still represented by 4 cards, it now shared the most represented spot with Gyarados, which increased its representation by 1. Gardevoir also increased by 1, and Lucario by 2. This was because these Pokemon had sets where they were the chase, even if they weren't worth over $100. The characters represented by a single card dropped dramatically, but included some characters that were missing from the $100 or greater dataset, like Shinx and Vulpix. There are more trainer characters represented in the most valuable card in each dataset, and only 8 of the 568 full art trainer cards were represented in the more than $100 dataset. Full art trainers get a lot of love online, like an unreasonable amount.
I tend to steer a lot of viewers away from collecting full art trainer cards, and that was poor advice of me.
You sure about that?
Down to 11. I am a full art trainer collector myself, so I know a card when I see one. I think this is going to do really well in the long run. It's a good investment. Card has already seen a very significant rise, and it's going to continue to rise. This is going to be a sought after card. I think it's going to shoot through the roof. This is why I truly believe this card is going to do well over time.
To take advantage of this card. Iona is a fan favorite and is very iconic.
Calling Iona an iconic character when they've only been around since Generation 9 is a bit of a stretch.
Now, what's cool about this artwork, it is placed within the golden hour, which in photography is known as the best time to take photos, so a lot of photographers have a connection to this.
Why does that matter?
And given the fact that she is holding a camera in the frame, it is definitely a nod to photographers.
The fuck has that got to do with anything?
Photographers, the golden hour makes this card a good investment. I just don't understand that logic. Ultimately though, SIRs are the first time in the history of Pokemon that full art trainers have an alternate art, so maybe the Iono parents are going to increase in value. Alright, rant over. Let's get back to the topic at hand. One thing you can see is that there are cycles of value in Pokemon cards. In 2003, in 2012, in 2019 and 21, there were higher value Pokemon cards than the surrounding years. So what could be causing that? Let's focus on the type of cards that were released during these high value eras. In 2002, the first secret rare shiny Pokemon characters were released. In 2004, the Gold Star cards featuring shiny Pokemon were released. In 2012, another group of secret rare shiny Pokemon were featured. In 2019, the Tag Team Pokemon and their alt arts were released, signifying what would become the new most desirable cards in the modern era. Though absent in 2020, in 2021, alt art cards returned featuring some of the most popular and beloved Pokemon characters. These are definitely not the only things that affected Pokemon price during these times, but looking at the type of cards and how valuable they are is really the only thing we can use to predict what may be valuable in the future. One of the most important parts of this dataset is to see how well the highest rarity correlates with the most valuable card in the dataset. Luckily, there's been some great datasets put together by Burpees on the Elite Forum and Flipside Gaming. I will have those both linked in the description. Of the most valuable cards in each set, 68% were the highest rarity of that set. This included secret rares, holo rares, special illustration rares, gold stars, alternate arts, and ultra rares. 32% of the cards in the data set were not the highest rarity in their respective sets. With the exception of the Pikachu and the Gray Felt Hat, all other promo cards were readily available or in ancillary products that were available to everyone. Looking at the data, one trend becomes immediately clear. Kanto Pokemon make up 50% in both data sets. I thought maybe Kanto was heavily weighted because of Charizard, but if you look at the percent of non-specific Pokemon, the ones that aren't EVs, aren't starters, aren't legendaries, they still follow the same trend, with Kanto Pokemon making up the mass majority. Before we move on to what my picks are, I want to read this command response from the game capital. Wondering what Pokemon products are the best to invest in? So is everyone else. There is no clear answer to these types of questions, because the prices tend to fluctuate. Short answer, do your own research, which is what we tried to do here. At least you will end up with something that you enjoy at the end of the day. If your cards bottomed out and were worth nothing tomorrow, which cards would you still want to have? Those are the ones you should be investing in. But enough about that, let's talk about what we really came here for. Based off all of the data that we have looked at today, what cards would I be investing in? Number one is Charizard. There's just no question. It is the character that has the most high value cards, for modern cards and for older cards. Next, Kanto Pokemon. Kanto Pokemon make up a mass majority of the high value cards and the most valuable cards in each set. Third is Legendaries. Legendaries had a pretty even spread, no single legendary pulling too far ahead. Next, I would do the EVs. There's no question that they are extremely popular and their cards seem to do very well. Finally, I would collect the starters. Starters are a mixed bag, but some starters do amazingly well. One last caveat on this, I wouldn't collect anything that isn't at least an illustration rare or an ultra rare. Even though Charizard has the most cards that are high value, that's still less than 1/3 of the amount of cards that Charizard has. Altogether, there are 342 EV cards of the 371 that don't even reach our metrics for high value cards. And even if you follow my advice to the T, you aren't necessarily going to make good investment choices.
Boo this man!
The Rainbow Rare Charizard is a high rarity Charizard card. When it first came out, it was selling for over $300. It has only dropped since then, and now the market price for this card is under $50. I hope that data was interesting and informative. This channel will have videos on pull rate statistics as well as my personal finance experience collecting cards. If that interests you, you might want to subscribe. And if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, please put it in the comments below. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.